wanted.
They were supposed to establish themselves as a top 4 team and qualify for the Champions League year after. Millions are spent with one goal in mind: take Everton to the summit of the Premier League table and compete with the very best. But we all know that this story has a tragic end. At the heart of the downfall was a man driven by the ambition to be the very best. But unfortunately for him, his ambition would lead to the club's ultimate failure. In this video, we answer the question: how did Everton go from qualifying for the Champions League to constantly surviving relegation battles in the Premier League on a yearly basis? To answer this question, we have to go back where it all began. The year was 2002. Everton were having a horrendous season, one in which saw them regress as a football club as they were caught up in a relegation battle. The situation was so bad that during the season, the club had a period in which they only won just one game in 13 Premier League matches and were at risk of relegation. It's important to remind ourselves that Everton are one of only 6 teams that have never suffered relegation since the Premier League was formed back in 1992. Relegation just wasn't an option for such a historic club. Something had to be changed, and that's exactly what happened. Following Everton's woeful form saw the arrival of David Moyes in March 2002. David Moyes was caught up in a really difficult position. He arrived towards the end of the season with only 9 games remaining of that season and found himself having to deal with a team that was only 2 positions away from the relegation zone. The pressure was on for a manager that had very little managerial experience at the top flight of English football. His only accolades as a manager before joining Everton were winning the Division 2 league title with Preston. Some would have said that the job was almost impossible, but despite this, Moyes wasn't fazed. He won 4 of his first 9 Premier League games, guiding the club to safety, earning the respect of the players, and kick-starting the most underrated managerial reign in Premier League history. In the following season, Moyes had one demand from the board: focus on recruiting young players that would fight for the badge and work hard for the team, and that's exactly what the board did. Everton didn't have a multi-billion-dollar owner. They didn't have a massive stadium. All they had was a long-term vision and the perfect manager to get the best out of the players. In his first full season, Everton managed a 7th place finish, an incredible start for David Moyes, considering that Everton were financially struggling at this time. In his second season, things were different. The club finished 17th. Now, most football clubs would have considered sacking their manager after such a disappointing season, but this wasn't Everton. The owners stuck with the manager, but not even they could have predicted what was to come next. In the 2004-2005 season, Everton would make history, qualifying for the Champions League after nearly being relegated the previous season. But what makes this feat even more impressive was that this was the same season that saw the departure of Wayne Rooney to Manchester United for £27 million. This was a record fee for a teenager at the time, but what makes this even more shocking was that less than £2.5 million of the money they got for Rooney was spent on recruitments, and even after all that, they still qualified for the UCL. This just shows how Everton didn't need big money signings to maintain their level of success. Under David Moyes, Everton would go on to qualify for European football on multiple occasions, establishing themselves as a well-run mid-table team. The only thing that prevented this team from constantly challenging for the top 4 was that financially, Everton just couldn't compete with the more established teams in the league. Even after finishing 17th, the board still backed the manager, and the rest was history. In 2013, Moyes would eventually depart for Manchester United, but this didn't stop Everton from qualifying for European football under Roberto Martinez in the same season Moyes left the club. In 2016, the trajectory of Everton Football Club would change forever with the arrival of Farhad Moshiri. This marked a new chapter in the club's history. Farhad Moshiri was a British-Iranian businessman with one goal in mind: turn Everton into a consistent top 4 team, and change the landscape of English football. He acquired a 50% stake in Everton in 2016. Years down the line, that stake would rise to 94.1%. When Moshiri bought the club, he had 3 priorities in mind. Hire an upcoming manager that could compete with the Premier League's elite managers, build a massive stadium that would financially change the trajectory of the club, and of course, spend unreasonable amounts of money in the transfer window so that the entire league knew that they meant business. And this was exactly what he did. Moshiri overhauled Everton's footballing management system by sacking Roberto Martinez after a string of bad results, and brought in not just a new manager but a new sporting director as well. For the managerial role, he brought in Ronald Koeman. He was the man responsible for guiding Southampton to a 6th place finish in the league while helping the club record their highest ever points total in the Premier League, as well as helping the Saints qualify for European football 2 seasons in a row. He was seen as the perfect replacement for Roberto Martinez. For the new sporting director, he brought in Steve Walsh. He played a pivotal role in Leicester City's title-winning season. He was head of recruitment and was responsible for bringing in the likes of Riyad Mahrez and N'Golo Kante to Leicester City, crucial players in their title-winning season. He was head of recruitment at Leicester City, but was given the role as director of football at Everton. This was one of many mistakes that Moshiri would go on to make. More on that later in the video. Moshiri didn't just change Everton's management system. Financially, his millions put Everton on a completely different scale. No longer were Everton focusing on smart recruitments as they did in the past. They were now focusing on bringing in some of the best players around the league. And they didn't care how much it would cost them because they now had an owner that could financially back the club. But Moshiri wasn't just focused on the footballing side of things. He planned on building a new stadium in hopes to compete financially with the likes of Manchester United and Manchester City. Everton's current ground, Goodison Park, just wasn't gonna cut it for the vision Moshiri had for the future of the club. In Moshiri's first season at Everton, the club had a 7th place finish, qualifying for European football, and everything looked to be heading in the right direction, but in reality, there were a lot of underlying problems at the club. In the second season, the manager, Ronald Koeman, suffered many setbacks. The club sold Lukaku to Manchester United. He was their top goalscorer in the previous season. His departure left a massive hole in the team, and the club failed to secure proper replacements. Key players were constantly injured during the season. The summer signings bought in the transfer window failed to address the gaping holes in the team. As a result of these areas in the team not being addressed, the club were in the relegation zone by the end of October, and this led to Ronald Koeman being shown the door. He was sacked and replaced by Sam Allardyce, who managed to steady the ship and guide the club to safety. Sam Allardyce left the club by the end of the season. One of the most overlooked reasons that eventually led to the sacking of Ronald Koeman was the appointment of Steve Walsh as the sporting director. Steve Walsh was seen more as a scout rather than a sporting director, and there were fans that agreed with this.
Steve Walsh wasn't a director of football, he was a scout and a coach. He should never have been given the role of director of football. Him and Koeman obviously didn't work out, and then we had the whole managers scenario and saga.
He was more familiar with the coaching side of the game rather than being a sporting director. Steve Walsh was only Everton's second choice pick as sporting director after failing to secure their first choice pick. During his time at Everton, Steve Walsh spent over £250 million on players that were promising at the time, but the majority of those players failed to live up to their expectation. It was clear at the time that Everton weren't thinking long term. By the end of the 2017-2018 season, Walsh was relieved of his duties. After sacking Walsh, it was back to the drawing board for Farhad Moshiri. For the new season, he brought in Marcel Brands as the new sporting director. This time, the game plan was to bring in an experienced director of football who could build the squad around a specific playstyle. Marcel Brands arrived at Everton after a successful stint at Dutch side PSV. Moshiri believed that he was the right man for the job. The same summer Marcel arrived, saw the arrival of a new manager in Marco Silva. The appointment of Marco Silva was seen as a long-term plan for the club's vision, not just a short-term quick fix. It wasn't just that, Marco Silva played an attractive brand of football that the fans would appreciate. In Everton's first transfer window under Marco Silva, the club bought in Luca Dean and central defender Yerry Mina. This season was seen as a major step in the right direction as Everton finished 8th. They were only just 3 points away from qualification for European football. In Marco Silva's second season, the club would fail to secure defensive reinforcements in the summer transfer window, and as a result, the club would start the season with only 3 first-team recognized centre-backs. At the start of the season, Everton was struggling defensively due to a lack of first-team defensive options, constantly conceding from set-piece. By December, when results turned against Marco Silva, he was sacked by the board, a decision Marcel Brands didn't agree with. Marco Brands' time at Everton was filled with a lot more complications than most people think. During his time at the club, he made some questionable signings that failed to live up to the expectation. But the real question was, who was actually responsible for making these signings? It turns out that during his time at Everton, he wasn't the only one responsible for making these signings. Everton's board, in more particular the owner Farhad Moshiri, was heavily involved in the signings that the club made. This prevented Marcel Brands from taking full control of Everton's sporting decisions and created major disagreements between him and the board. Marcel Brands wanted to make smart signings on low wages to help manage the club's ever-growing wage bill and prepare for the long-term future. The board, on the other hand, had different ideas. They wanted flashy signings on high wages and were only thinking short-term. In most cases, Moshiri and the board would have their way. The same situation applied to managers. Marcel Brands tried at all costs to prevent the board from sacking Marco Silva because he believed that Silva was a top trainer and could help build for the future. Unfortunately for Marco Silva, the board had their way and he was sacked. A similar situation occurred when the club was managed by Carlo Ancelotti. Marcel Brands pleaded with the board to keep Ancelotti at the club, but he eventually left for Real Madrid after he said that the board failed to back him. The club weren't just failing Ancelotti, they were failing their sporting director as well. This was all reported by Forbes. Marcel Brands would eventually suffer the same fate as many before him and was sacked. Surely for Everton fans, things could not get any worse. But unfortunately for them, they do. In 2020, Moshiri would make a decision he would soon regret. After sacking Ancelotti, the club bought in Rafa Benitez as his replacement. Yes, you heard that right. Wasn't Rafa Benitez the same guy who managed Everton's arch-rivals Liverpool to a Champions League title? Everton fans could deal with terrible recruitment, but the hiring of Benitez was something they couldn't stand for. Some supporters went as far as protesting to show their frustration with this appointment. To the surprise of absolutely no one, Benitez lasted 6.5 months and was fired. For years, Everton fans dreamed of an owner that could take the club to the brink of the Premier League table. That dream soon turned into a nightmare. One point we need to understand is that Moshiri, at the end of the day, had the final say on what decisions were made at the club. The constant sacking of managers, the terrible recruitment, it was all down to his decision making. If Moshiri had listened to the advisors on the board on how to run the football club, he wouldn't have had to waste so much money on terrible recruitments and constantly changing managers. Instead, he let his ego get in the way, and it ultimately led to the club's downfall. I think for the takeover, Everton were one of very few clubs that sustained a profit in the Premier League. After the takeover, for the next 3 consecutive seasons, Everton sustained record losses in the Premier League, and it was down to the reckless spending from the board. But for Everton and Moshiri, they would suffer one final blow. On November 2023, the club were found guilty of breaching profit and sustainability rules as a result of their reckless spending. By the end of the 2023-2024 season, the club were deducted a total of 8 points as punishment for breaking the rules. In 2025, the Friedkin Group acquired Moshiri's 94.1% stake in the club, and that was that. I think anyone can sympathize with Moshiri considering all the money he spent. He tried his best, but ultimately things just didn't work out. If you enjoy football videos like the one you just watched, check out this one where I discuss how Tottenham have scored the second most goals in the league and are mid-table. If you liked the video, click subscribe. I will see you in the next one.